Okay.
All right.
2 seconds. So I think we are live. You just double check. Yeah, we're all good. Seb, thanks very much for joining me. You're looking very well.
Thanks, Tom. Happy to be doing the second session here.
Absolutely. So for those who didn't catch the first one, so the first session we did was for MakerPad members. That's up on the site, but we decided to make this one public because I think a lot of people could benefit from seeing some integrations with some new tools, which we don't get to cover a lot. And that is obviously 8base and Retool. So would you care to explain what it is we're going to be doing today?
Yeah. So if for those who joined us last week, we kind of built a basic event management backend, right? So we set up a simple data model for creating events, having attendees for those events, creating tickets for those events and whatnot, and kind of explore the 8base backend tool. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to show how do you kind of like close the loop and use a low-code tool or no-code tool for adding a front end to that backend, right? So we're going to be accessing that API to the backend using a Retool, and then building some front end, for that. And so you can kind of see the connection of the data to the front end that has to happen there.
Nice.
This is just one way of doing it. Retool is a really cool tool, so I thought it'd be fun to go over it. If you're building custom JavaScript applications, or whatever you're doing, you'll be able to pull your data out of the backend and into a front end. However, that's what we're going to be working on today.
Nice. I think it's pretty worth touching on Retool. So would you care to just explain what Retool is? Because it's one of those applications which doesn't kind of fit directly into the stack of like the majority of, say, like no code builders as such. So it's mainly for like, I'd put it in the low code category, and especially around like internal tooling. I don't know how you describe it.
Yeah, no, Retool is 100% for like internal tooling, right? So if you're trying to build some type of custom application or custom screen that would be for, call it your operations, right? Or your internal company usage, Retool is an awesome way of doing that, to where you could probably build the whole thing yourself. Now, what's the difference between that and a non-internal tool? Usually if you're building a digital product, something that's going to be customer facing, you're going to want a lot of branding, styling capabilities, kind of more custom flows. You're focusing a lot more on like a rich user experience, which are not things that Retool really covers. Whereas, if you're just building, like I said, that internal tool, that's something to where if it doesn't look exactly how you need it to or want it to look, it's not going to be as, you're looking more for the functionality than the aesthetic, and so they have all, we're not going to be covering all of them today, but they have things like authentication. So you can do authentication. What I like about their tool the most is that you can integrate different types of data sources really well. And so that's what makes it really awesome to link to an 8base workspace and just get the data coming right out of it.
Got it. Sounds good to me. Let's jump into it, and then I can field any questions and ask them as we go.
Cool. All right. So let's see. Screen share. All right. Screen share. Cool.
Yep.
And application window, StreamYard.
And I should be able to add it to the stream. There you go.
All right. So we see like the infinite window depth. Okay, cool.
Yes.
All righty. So do you guys see 8base? Do you see 8base, Tom?
Yep. See it.
Okay, cool. So just to go back over what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back into that MakerPad demo workspace that we worked on last week. And so this is where, this was the workspace that we worked on in the webinar last week. We set up a simple data model here. We had events and tickets. Those were our two tables, and with the fields defined on them and the relationships established between them. We ran some queries, which we're going to be doing more of today. And then we also looked a little bit at the roles and permissions engine, to where we made an attendee role and defined on that, what someone's allowed to do if they have that role associated with their user account. However, the one piece of information that we're going to need today, which is important, or two, is we're going to need to generate an API token, and then we're going to have to use our endpoint URL. But before that, let's actually just jump into Retool and create a new application. So actually, before creating a new application, we're first going to create a resource. So the resource, right, is what we're going to use to essentially say, declare 8base in Retool as a resource that we will be using to get data. So I'm going to click on the resource type. As you can see, there's all these different resource types that you could use. If you're using a Postgres database, if you're using Snowflake, DynamoDB, or Salesforce, SendGrid, all these different systems. But for us, we can just say a GraphQL API. And then we're going to call it the maker pad event API 8base, full mouthful, but we'll run with it.
There's a lot more connections on the last page, a lot more API endpoints on the last saw. That's also
really? Yeah, no, there's a lot in there. So the base URL is we're going to put in our 8base API workspace or workspace API endpoint. And then in the URL parameters, we're going to leave those blank. But under headers, what we're going to do is we're going to say authorization bearer. And now we're going to go ahead and generate an API token. For this workspace, it's okay if we see them right now. We're just going to say this is a admin token for this workspace and call it the NP demo token. And copy that. Cool. And now I'm just going to drop this in as the bearer token. Now, the one thing here is that there are different types of authentication that you can set up. Like I said, we're not going to do the authentication piece today, but if we went through this type of authentication, then we could say, okay, well, this is how someone logs in and gets the token returned, and then the token gets set dynamically. But today we're just going to set it statically. So if I say create this resource created, we're good. Now let's create an app. So we're going to create a new app called the Maker Pad Events app. Create this app. And I'm going to drop us in here. Cool. And this is, let me just get rid of this right now so we can just start from scratch.
Nice. So for anyone tuning in now, we did a previous session where we set up our backend in 8base, and now we're serving it up into a form of an internal application using Retool.
Yeah.
Just so you can catch up.
Cool. So here we are now in the Retool design tool, right? And you can see we have a blank screen, but we have to start building out the screen. And so we have a list of all these components over here that we can use, tons of different types of components. This is the editor down here for our queries and whatnot that we'll need, as well as then if we look at the left side, this is the kind of data pane that we can look at all the different data that we have. So you can see that they have a current user, local storage, viewport params, but we'll be adding to those actually. So I'm going to hide them for now. So the first thing we're going to do is actually start getting our events out of the system, right? So if I take this table and I drop this table right here, we see that it has this data property, and by default it added some just static data. I'm going to delete that because we don't want any of that. So now we can see that it has an error. And so how do we actually get a query, get our 8base data into this table to start populating it? What we got to do is we have to write a query. So I'm going to go in here and say create a new query, and I'm going to name it our events list query. And then I'm going to choose the resource that we wanted, which is the MakerPad Event API 8base. And now it gives us this query editor down here. Now, what's cool about this query editor is it's the exact same one. It's the exact same one as we have here in 8base. So, for example, if we wanted to write our query over here, we would say query, and we want to get a list of our events out of 8base. So we're going to say it's an events list, and we're just going to say that we want to, for every event that we want to have the ID of the event, the title of the event, the description of the event, the start time, end time, and when the event was last updated. So we can run that query in here, and we see that we'll get the data back that we want. So I'm going to copy this query and drop it in here. And what's really cool about GraphQL editors is that since it knows we're using the MakerPad base event API and it knows what that endpoint is, we actually have the autocomplete even in Retool here. So anywhere that you're going to write the queries, so we can just write the rest of our queries in here. But I just wanted to show that you could do it in 8base and copy it over.
Nice.
So
I was going to ask that about that. That query builder, it wasn't something that you designed. That's like out of the box with GraphQL. So can you expect to find something similar in everywhere that serves up a GraphQL endpoint?
That's part of the GraphQL specification right there. So yeah, so people that are building GraphQL tools or using the open source ones, it's kind of this rich ecosystem of tooling that everyone can use, and that's included like even right here to where if I wanted to look at all the different queries I have, for events, I could just type events right into here, and all those different things that are event related are going to pop up, and I can look at the documentation for them. So really,
so you have
really
to change back and forth through Windows, reading through documentation.
Exactly.
Nice.
So cool. So we do that, and so we write that in. Let me just save and run it. So save, successfully run. It shows that we got that data back. And so now what we're going to do is, if we look back here, we can see that we have this now new events query list, right? And if we open it, there's this is like the object of all the different information on that. And so what we're going to do is we are going to want to use that object now and populate our table with it, which we're also going to rename to our events table, just so everything is consistent and you see that that's there. So in the data here, I have to do these double curly braces, which is essentially anything that's written between the double curly braces is code, right? But it gives us access to that data layer. And so now if I say, hey, I want to look at I could say the next object is events list, because that was the name of our query. And then I know that items is going to be the array that got returned of all our data. And so once I do that, the table is automatically going to populate with all the different headers, for each key in each object, right? So already our events is populating that list. And if I wanted to, I could say, well, I don't want to see the ID on the table, and I don't want to see when it was updated yet, even though I'm using that information, or I'm bringing that information into the view. So pretty cool. Questions there?
Sorry, not sure we just cut out for a second there.
Oh, are we good?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Cool. Okay.
So yeah, just missed that last bit where you're saying about even though you're bringing in all the information into the app, you can kind of change the visibility so you only see what you want.
Exactly, right? And so adding removing the tables that we need to remove and whatnot, or the column, excuse me.
Now, easier than actually just changing like the query, or like going back and like editing the data that's shown, just like toggling it on or off.
Yeah. So sometimes, so I'll show you why you wouldn't necessarily want to edit the query in a minute. But sometimes you want data to be brought into the application, but not necessarily displayed. So for example, here we want a list of our events. The ID is not necessarily a very useful piece of information, but if we want to update an event, we're going to have to use the ID. So we'll need that ID for like building a form, right?
Got it.
Now, there are some other cool things that we can do here as well, right? And so, for example, like this is just a static list or a static table. What if we wanted to have like a search feature on it? A lot of apps might take the approach of saying like, oh, well, there's an option for search on a table. However, what we're going to actually do is update our query and add a search or a text input that we'll use. So here, what we can do is we can add a input and call this our search input. So let's just search input. Cool. Now, once we add that there, we can now go down and see that on run, let's try to find on blur, right? So once you type something in, and then once you removed it, or once you clicked out of the input, that's the blur event. You can then specify to run a query. So we're going to write a new query right now. Or actually, we're going to use the same query, which is the events list query, but we're going to update it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say that our query takes an argument called search, which is a string, and it's optional. And then when we run our query, we're going to have a filter that filters our events by title, which contains the search argument. Cool. And what's nice is since we declared the argument there, it updated, 1 second, it's going to update, right, variable, so there we go, search right there. And so now what we can say is we want to say that, hey, we're going to pull in for this value, if we look at our search input, whatever the value of the search input is, right? So right now it's blank, but if I type in hello, now that search input value is, oh, hello, I spelled it wrong. So what's cool about this, let's delete that and save and run. So here, so we can see that we have one called Battle of the Bands. So if I typed in battle and I clicked out, it's running the query, updating our list accordingly. So we're really quickly starting to be able to create that dynamic experience that we would need, right? So there's some other, obviously, there's some other really cool stuff that we can start to work with this as well, right? Which is, okay, well now how we start to run updates with our information and start sending updates to our backend. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to pull down a tabbed container here. All right, 1 second up. And see the layout tool. So what you're seeing here is kind of like the UI that you'll end up getting. And so that's when we say, like, if you're trying to build like a some type of application for customers, it's probably not going to cut it for them. But you know, if this is something that you and your team are just going to use, it's really, really effective. So here we have a new tab container. So let's just say for this, it's going to be new event. And then the next tab is going to be edit event. Cool. So for a new event, ooh, what did I do there? Oh, there we go. Let's delete this one and bring that back up. I accidentally created two. Ooh. Nothing like a live demo. Okay. There we go. Nope. Okay. One more try there. Got it.
You did well to get it down there in the first place.
I don't know, right? It popped it down automatically somehow. Okay, cool. So when we want to create an event, what we got to do is we got to have a title for the event. So let's do, first off, let's add a form element. Excuse me. Okay, so let's delete that. And so we're gonna take a form. Why is it not? Oh, there we go. Cool. So add a form to our screen here. Make it take up more of that container because we can. And this is gonna be the new event form. All right. So now what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to add some of those fields to it. So we're gonna say that, okay, well, first off, our event has to have a title, which is going to be event. So let's just say title. Then we are going to have an event description, which is going to be another text field. So here, let's just call this description or description. Cool. And let's make that one just bigger. Awesome. And then we're going to now add a date range picker because we have to have a start and end to our dates. So get the date range picker, drop that in here, open it up. Cool. And then what's nice is, you know, if you're familiar with tools like Moment.js and whatnot, they actually bring them in as dependencies for you. And so, for example, as you can see here, like if we want to start value and end value, showing you that you could use moment in there. So we could just say, okay, well, I want to use moment to give me back a new date, which is today. And so the start value is always going to be today then, right? Oh, second. There we go. Cool. And you can see that reflected over there. And then I think we could do like moment add 10 for the end date, but we'll just leave it right there for now. And cool. And then if you want to format your string, whatever you got to do. So let's take this, drag it down a little bit. Awesome. And now what we're going to need to make sure is that whenever someone actually submits our form, we have to have a mutation or a query to run. So we're going to have to add our new query here, which is going to be the event create query. Right on. And now for this query, let's go ahead and write it out, but using this editor. So we want to make sure that we have a mutation. It is the event create mutation, and that takes in data.
Sorry to jump in. Would you mind just, I know we explained it on the first session, but would you mind just explaining what a mutation is again, just in case anyone's seeing GraphQL queries for the first time?
Yeah. So a query, like a normal query, is whenever you're reading data from the data source. A mutation is used whenever you're doing a write operation from the data or to the data source. So anything like a create operation, an update operation, update by many operation, a delete or destroy operation. So anything that's a write. Make sense?
And in comparison to a REST API, which I know most like no-code folks are used to. Yeah.
So, this is just different terminology. For the most part, you could think about your queries on a GraphQL API as a get operation, where a mutation would be a post, put, patch, or delete operation. That said, one unique thing about GraphQL is how it's working is all API calls made via GraphQL are just post requests. So essentially, all a GraphQL request is that this gets turned into a string that gets sent via a post request to the API, and then at the API level, it interprets the string to understand how it then needs to execute the call. So that's how the data is being sent back and forth.
Nice. That explains it nicely. Thanks
Cool.
for that.
Yeah, for sure. So then what we're going to want to do here is we're going to make sure our title is there, and then we're going to need an argument called title. We're going to want our description there. So we're going to need an argument which is right there, the description, and we're going to want the start time, which is our start time, and we're also going to want the end time. So we need to have a variable called end time, and you'll see how we link this all up. So whenever you are using variables in a GraphQL call, you have to declare them at the top and give them a declared type. So for example, we need a string called title, right? So that's going to be string, and the little exclamation mark means it's mandatory. So the query will not execute unless you supply it. We also are going to need description, which is also a string that's mandatory. And then we're going to need our start time, which is a date time. I think it's actually, there we go. Mandatory, as well as just copy that right on over and rename it end time, which is the same way. Cool. And then what's nice is we could then define what information we want back. All we're going to say is we want it back a timestamp that says it was created. Let's have selection. So created by, created at. There we go. And so now you can see that these are populating down here. So what we're going to want to do is go ahead and actually extract the data from our form. So let's rename our form. So it's new event form. I don't think we have anything there. Good. Oh, wait, did that rename it? Let's see. It didn't like that. Maybe it was name. So, or we'll just leave it as form 1. So we open those again. We go to form 1 data and then title. And so that's where we're going to get our title out of. We can copy that down to the description. So form one data and the desk, that's what we call it there. And then the date range is a little bit trickier. So what we're going to do here is, instead of accessing forms, we're accessing it directly, which is dates. And then it's going to show us that there are all these different values, because there's all these different ways you can do validations on what dates are selected and whatnot. So then we are going to look for the start value, which is right there, and get that timestamp back. And then we're going to get the end value. Cool. For that one back. Awesome. And then what's nice is once we run this update, what we can say is, hey, we just created it was run successfully, run our list query again so that all the tables get updated and whatnot with the new information. So we just add that right there, and that could be multiple queries on success or different queries on failure. So pretty powerful, little way of doing the flows there. So if we save that, awesome. So we save that. So let's actually see if this works. Let's just go ahead and preview our app over here. So we can see that we, open it in the screen. That's working. And then we can say company, that's working. But now let's say we're going to create a new event called Maker Pad Webinar Part 2. And we're going to say that going over Retool. And it's happening starting tomorrow, and it is ending the next day.
Marathon,
exactly.
Nice.
There we go. There we go. Okay. Submit. Let's see what happens. Oh, 1 second. What did I do? Wrong. I said something wrong if I didn't. Okay, maybe I didn't hook it up correctly. So on submit, on form submit, we want to use that query, the event create query. Cool. Now let's do this. So I'm going to make this faster. MP test 2, and here we go from there to there. Awesome. Submit, success. Loads it right into our table, right? So
amazing.
Yeah, so really, really great, fast way that we're just kind of building this out. Now, sorry,
So
go.
Yeah, let me just pause on that a second, because we've now got like a simple, very powerful, like internal piece of tooling that, like, once like configured, anybody in the organization can use to input or edit data. So in this case, we're using it for an event, to actually create and edit events. But let's say if you had somebody actually serving that event data up onto the front end of a site, as soon as you hit that submit button, that data is going to go immediately onto the site, as well as being able to see it in the database. Obviously, with a bit of front end work serving it actually up and connecting it all up. But once it's connected like this, somebody can just input info here and it go exactly where you need it.
Yeah. So yeah, that's one way. Yeah. So however you want to configure that, you absolutely could. So let's say that was an issue in some way of, well, you want people to be able to submit something, but it not immediately go to a live site. What you could do is you could add a property onto a table that is, draft versus published, only show the published posts because you have some other workflow for validating those. And anything that's submitted through this internal tooling is just automatically marked as a draft, right? So
got it.
Different ways of playing with it.
Yeah, so this is obviously the most simple version, but you can see like how you can like build this out to have obviously loads more fields, loads more information in there. But yeah, that's as the most simple version. It's like, it seems really powerful.
Exactly. No, and it really is, because you think about this, how much work this is doing for you from, just kind of setting it up so that in the 20, 30 minutes that we've been on the call, we are on the webinar, we're already having something that I could send a link to someone and say, use this, which is a really, really powerful value proposition. Now, the other thing that's really cool here, we can look at is, so let's say that we wanted to do this same thing, but for editing an existing event, right? So For example, we're going to still drag our form. Oop, did that work? 1 second. So we're still going to drag our form over here. There we go. Right. And when doing that, we're then going to grab, it's called form 2. We're going to throw in our title. Right. So let's see a title here. Title. Oh, label. Label. Title. Cool. There we go. And we're also going to add the same thing, but for a description. So you'll see a little bit of this range. Where's our date range picker? Cool. For our date range picker, we're going to grab it and add the same things here. So moment, and throw in a new date. Cool. And for the end too. Now, the thing is that what's interesting is we want to now have this to be able to edit events, right? So how do we kind of build that connection between this form and the data and a single event in our database that we want to actually perform an update on? What's cool is what we can do is so we can say, okay, well, here what we're going to do is inside the title, we're going to say what is the default value? And we're going to then look at our events table, and it gives us this property called selected row and then the data. And so here is where we're going to go in and then say, okay, well, I want to look at the title of the selected row. And so as you can see, that first webinar is selected. So that's the one in there. But now if I clicked over to the next one, this is the new selected row and it updates my form. Same thing with description here. Let's go back here, copy this, drop it back in the default value here. And now I'm going to say description. And now it's giving us that value. Awesome. And then here, what we're going to do is for the start time, instead of having this just new date, we're actually going to go back and access the same thing, which is our events table list data. And then we're going to get the start time here. Cool. So it knows that event start time. And then we're going to drop this into the end value and give it as the end time. Right? Oh, there we go. Cool. So now what we have is this feature to where now whenever we're collecting a list, it's updating the value of the form that we might want to edit so we can start to edit the data on that event. Now we're going to have to write a new query and able to execute this event. Let's see if there's a duplicate feature. Yeah, cool. We're going to duplicate this here. We're going to say event update query, or I should say that, call it mutation, but we're going to call it query just for sake of consistency here. Query. We already have roughly the data that we need here. So we're going to rename it to update because that's the name of it. We have the data that we're bringing in, but we're also going to need to now add the ID of the record that we're updating and then add that into our data object here. Right. So now we have to kind of remap these to, instead of be using our first form field, it's using our second one. So first off is that even though we're not showing the ID on our table, it's still part of the selected data row. So what we can do is go into, grab that one, paste it in here, and instead of title, obviously, we're going to be showing the ID. As you can see, it has the ID of the record, so we know we're good there. Then when we go to the next one, cool, now we're going to update it via our form because that's static, so we can just pull up the selected data row, but now on our forms, we need to make sure that we're getting the updated data property. So this is form 2 data, and I think text input string, my first webinar. Cool. So we got that one. Then for description, we're going to have the same thing except for text input 5. It's going to be great. That's our description. And then here we have date range picker 2. So let's just grab date range picker 2, start value, and then we're going to go for date range picker 2, end value. Cool. Save that query. We're good there. And now on this form, what we're going to want to make sure is that whenever we submit it, we're gonna run our update query mutation right there. So let's now, I think we can just reload the page. And yep. So we're here, we're querying through our events. We click on one, we select it, we can see it. We don't want this to be, we want to give it a longer description, which is more than 3K1 with the team, get ready for fun. And then we're going to say that we're going to change the dates on it. 2-day run, long run, submit that, and the query ran successfully. So query ran successfully. So now, but what we didn't do is we didn't tell it to rerun the data afterwards. So as you can see, if we look at our description right here, it hasn't updated. So one thing that we're going to want to do now is go back in here and say, okay, well, after this event update query runs successfully, oh, does it say? Yeah, it says events trigger list query. So let's see why it didn't. Let's reload the page and see what happened. Morning run with friends. Oh, it did update. I just looked at the wrong column. Get ready for fun. So we're already up. We were already up.
Well.
Say again?
I was looking at exactly the same column.
Yeah, exactly. So we think title would be in the beginning. So simple enough to rearrange it because it is confusing. Let's drag and drop that there. Cool. And now we have the right ordering. Awesome. So if we can just try that again really quickly. If I do that, edit the event, exclamation mark, submit the update, success, and boom, we have the new updated event right there. So, you know, there are tons of things that we can go farther with here. But I think, you know, some of the important higher level concepts are being covered, which is that we have this ability of defining the resource, which we did in the beginning, which was super simple. Here's my API endpoint. Here's some type of authentication. If you don't want to use authentication, if you have public data and just want a public endpoint, you don't need to specify that. And 8-base can also accommodate that. Then when you have that resource, you're then going to be defining your queries or your mutations of how you want to use it in any screen. And then what's nice is this becomes a little like shared asset, because you're saying, hey, you know, if you wanted to, you could run an update whenever you click this button, or it could be whenever you select something from a dropdown, you know, or if you exit out of an input. There's all these different events that you can use that for, and it could be one or multiple of them that you get to use. However, you know, really quickly now, are you starting to see how you can start to build out that internal tool or those screens that you're going to need to enable any workflow for your company that, you know, your company, business, project, whatever it might be that you're working on. So
yeah, that's what I was going to say. What other modules are available to us within Retool? And because obviously anything that we can do in Retool, we can supply through the backend in 8-base. So let's say there's going to be more pieces data-wise to an event. So there'd be things like images, there'd be countless other pieces of data. Like what else can we add in here?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here. So, yeah, if we wanted to use, let's see if we can throw an image in here, because I think some of our events actually have images. There drop that in there. Give us a cat, because why not? We'll put our list query here. So I think we have a logo. Cool, logo, and then we have a download URL on that logo. And so I'm going to save and run that. And so then for this edit thing, I'm going to say, okay, well, for the event list selected row, data, logo, download URL, load URL. Cool. So it's going to give us an error, right? Because it says it doesn't have that property. But if I select one that does have that, then it's going to give me, you know, the morning run. It's going to give me the image of that. So, but you wouldn't want that error, obviously, in your front end for the picture. So one way that you can get around that is, you know, these inputs are pretty One second, let me find why is it giving me the really bad error? It's not letting me see what I need to do. There we go, cool. So one thing that's cool is that, like I said, you can write code in these little brackets. So we can do a ternary here. So here we can say is that if, so use this as a Boolean. So if there is a value for a logo, then return the download URL, else return an empty string, right? Or the default placeholder kitten image that we wanted to give originally. So now we kind of took care of that, right? So, but yeah, so it can handle images. Let's see what else. So checkboxes, checkbox groups, trees, toggles, toggle lists, radio groups, date and time pickers. We only use a date range picker, but you could use date and time, and that would be more valuable if you wanted to say event starts at 9 a.m. So all the different form components that are needed, progress indicators, signature pads, which are great if you need people to sign stuff, file uploaders, microphones for voice recordings, timers, button groups, barcode scanners, charts, statistics, PDF viewers, iframes, video players, recordable, there's a lot, calendars, S3 uploader, Stripe card form, so you could build a checkout form if you needed to for something, auth login, custom components, so you could write your own HTML, JavaScript, and CSS to do pretty much anything and just embed that in a view here. Mm-hmm. So there's a ton that you could do here, and connect to your backend. But yeah, so we could probably play with maybe one more if needed, but it would be a true rabbit hole.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I think one distinction that's kind of important to make, that even if you're actually easily making apps like this, is the actual difference between building on, say, a database which is slower, which is something which is used probably more common in the no-code space rather than the low-code space, where this is that you're actually building on top of a production grade API and backend innate basing GraphQL. Could you just explain the difference as to the benefits of doing something like this from the get-go?
Mm-hmm. For sure. So, sometimes all you need, right, is a spreadsheet. And that's totally fine. If your project only needs a spreadsheet and that's what you can use productively, and it's not going to grow, it's not going to be, you don't need to have access controls on it and whatnot, just use that. The issue with a lot of tools comes is, Retool is smart in that they don't provide the database. They just provide the front-end builder. So you can quickly jump in because your data is usually stored somewhere else, which is more important, right? So it's like if you have some type of database at your company, like a PostgreSQL database, you just want to be able to connect to it to get data out of it. If you're building a backend that needs to be able to be scalable and, and maybe 7 different apps are all using the same API, and there's different interfaces for different types of users, 8base is a killer option for that. Pretty much if you're building a product that's like a go-to-market product. But where a lot of these types of tools kind of, personally, I disagree with the approach, even though they, like I said, they have their place, but not if you're trying to build real tooling, in my mind, is that they try to couple the database with the front end, which means that then at some point, if you want to go and scrap your front end, you have to figure out a way, well, how do I get my data back? Or how do I migrate it over to this system? It just creates a much bigger headache down the road. And a lot of them too understand that. And so then they make those systems proprietary, to where then they're like, oh, well, we store it in a proprietary format, so you can't get it out because they don't want people to leave. And so this, once again, this is very much for internal tooling, as we've said a few times now. But what it does is it allows you super fast to stand up something that's going to be useful, right? Which is super important. And then you have that flexibility of, if you want to, let's say that you build the internal tool, your company or your boss or whoever loves it, they decide that they really want to put more, more resources behind it and build it out farther, and maybe past the capabilities of what Retool is going to offer you. If you make sure that you then have a back end to where all your data is being stored, right? Then suddenly it just becomes oh, well, how do you want to build it now? Our data is in this highly accessible API for us to use, rather than how are we going to rip the data out of the proprietary front-end tool builder that I use, then set up hosting for or access to it some other way, or import it into another tool, to then just go through the same cycle all over again. Sense.
We've got like a few minutes left. Can we just look back and have a quick recap of what we built in 8base? So we've seen like how we've served it up in Retool. Let's just have a recap of what 8base looks like and how we put that data together in the first place, because obviously we're talking about like a backend as a service product in 8base. So we actually build out the backend completely, and all the data lives in 8base, and you just use a tool like Retool to serve it up as like an internal tool, or you use another tool to serve it up onto like a consumer facing front end. Or if you have like admin apps, so you've got like delivery drivers, you can just use 8base as like your database, as your backend, and then serve it up into several different places at once.
Exactly. So what we've been doing here is we've been accessing these, this events table essentially, and getting the events from there and whatnot, and then showing how we can manipulate those records. But those are coming out of our 8base backend. So essentially in the last week, what we did is we came in and we said, hey, we're going to create a table called events. And that table is going to have a field for title, description, logo, start time, end time, and then relationships to tickets and attendees, which is a relationship name for our users table, right? And so if we wanted to, we could view those records right in here in our own, data viewer solution. And then what we were doing is also saying that, okay, well, when we are enforcing roles and whatnot, we have an attendee role, right? And an attendee is a type of user, right? So let's see if we associate that with, we didn't. So let's say we're going to create our first user in the system. So that user is, we added some, Jennifer, all right? So we're going to give Jennifer the attendee role, right? And so this is her only role. And this means that whenever Jennifer's querying the API is going to enforce not only the records she can see, but also what she can do when she's sending those queries to the API. So for example, when she's running queries, she would not be able to create an event, but she would be able to see all the events, and she wouldn't be able to update any of them. She wouldn't be able to create a ticket, but let's see what the custom filter is. She'd be able to see all the tickets where she is the attendee, and so tickets belonging to her. So, going through and setting up these different permissions and whatnot. Another way that this all can get tied back into a user account is we can say that, hey, when someone does authenticate, so this is an authentication profile, and these are back-end settings that then get reflected in whatever front-end tool you're using. So don't think of this as like the UI that your users would never necessarily know that this exists, but this is the configuration of it on your end. And so here we're saying that, okay, well, when someone signs up, it's open to all, anyone can sign up, and then automatically they'd be assigned the attendee and the guest role, right? So you wouldn't have to ever worry about, setting some custom logic that assigns the role, unless of course you want to, because maybe someone has to upgrade or downgrade, concerns like that. However, all these different things then get made accessible via this API endpoint, which is what you saw us doing in Retool, to where we set that up as a resource, and then we could write those queries and have the autocomplete. However, the same interface that gets exposed to the developer via the endpoint is what you'd have right here in the query editor. Now, I like writing my queries out by hand, just using the autocomplete like that, because I think it's a really nice interface. If you want to, you can use the Explorer, right? So here's a list of all your queries that you have on your API, as well as if you wanted to, here's all the mutations that you'd have. So let's say you weren't comfortable just going in and writing them out. What you could do is you could say, okay, well, I want to write a mutation like we just did. And let's say you wanted to create a ticket. Let's find tickets, create a ticket. All right. And so the ticket has a cost. I'm going to update the cost in here to where it's a $20 ticket. And then I'm going to connect it to a certain attendee. So let's say I'm going to Jennifer@mail.co. And then I'm going to connect it to an event, which the event has an ID that I definitely don't know off the top of my head. But this would be going through and visually constructing that query for you, right? Mm-hmm. So just another interface that allows you to start building these out that you could then copy into whatever front end tool you're using that allows you to execute these queries at the right time. And then in the response data type description attendee cost, and then here, where is that? Yeah, so then down here I just say, hey, I want the ID back, but it formats it in this long view. I wonder if I prettify it. Nope, lose it there. Okay, but yeah. So this is this tool is one way to visually construct these queries that we were doing throughout the webinar.
Love it. This is like one of those things I think is like important for like especially the more technical people of like probably the high end of no code, low end of low code sort of thing to actually start to get familiar with, because once you know how to use a tool like this, it doesn't matter if you like outgrow a platform. If your back end is an 8-base, you can port it over to whatever you need. So yeah, if the platform for whatever reason doesn't fulfill what you want it to fulfill, if you have your entire data in here rather than a proprietary platform, you could then just switch it out pretty simply and just serve it up somewhere else.
Yeah, well, the thing we for people that for customers developing on 8-base that want to migrate off, we will provide them a full MySQL data dump so that they can port that over to their own MySQL database if they need to. But then again, too, it's very easy to just get everything out via the JSON API or the GraphQL API in JSON format, which is frankly, I think, what most people prefer. And so we're not trying to. We believe that the 8-base experience or the experience of developing on 8-base is just so developer friendly that that's our hook, not that we have to kind of box you in because it's hard to go elsewhere. But it's a really powerful tool, and it really fits in to, at least I think, the way that people want to build applications today, to where a lot of the excitement that people get around, at least a lot of excitement around like the web community is usually around design tools and front end experiences. To where then this piece gets forgotten, and then you see most people that when they start to have some traction on their startups, suddenly they're facing these issues of, well, my system's not scalable, my system's not secure, or they're just going to get completely charged through the roof for certain things that they are using. Where that's what we're trying to solve. We really want to be the solution to where when someone is saying, hey, I have a new idea for an app and I'm going to build something, my next side hustle, that the first thing that comes to mind is, well, I'm going to start at 8-base, and that's going to be my partner in the long run.
I like it. So if anybody has a no-code app builder, be it like mobile, web, whatever it is, you should be building a GraphQL connector so you can hook it up to 8-base and keep your data in here. Make things blazingly fast.
Yeah,
makes sense to me. I know, without naming any names, I know there's a couple of projects who are actively working on it, and it was on the roadmap. So hopefully they can watch this back and be further incentivized to get it out to everybody, because I think what this does, not only does it put to rest like a lot of the issues that people have with like existing solutions, which maybe not even just on like being boxed into something, but maybe speed is an issue, maybe security is an issue through auth and permissions, and if at least you're permissioning here on the right level without having to log yourself into a platform.
Mm-hmm.
But also like second, like the ability to actually swap platforms if you wanted to, and also like start to win over that like middle ground between those who can code and those who can't code. Because this is kind of like, okay, like if you did have some base knowledge in GraphQL and you were like starting to get familiar with actually building this out properly, like you probably get like a decent amount of respect from more technical people who say, look, you've actually done like a pretty decent job of this. Let me just like fix it up a bit and we can serve this up to be a production grade application, rather than that almost, I don't know, like immediate pushback that I know sometimes the no code space gets, that it's just for like MVPs and prototypes. Like if your back end is built on 8-base, there's no way someone can say that this is just like an MVP or a prototype, because the underlying infrastructure is solid.
No, and you know, it's funny. The thing that there's different types of people, right? And there's different types of developers. And the simple one that I usually say is, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? And if your goal is to build applications productively, you should use the tools that take away the most amount of work. You know, code is a liability most of the time, right? You know, and so the less code you can do and still achieve an acceptable or exceptional outcome is the best approach, you know, you can take on most projects. Now, some projects are so low level, you can't use a no code or a low code tool, right? And if that's your case, don't look for one. Go do it. But you know, there are some very well-known patterns now in how we approach application development. And you know, a tool like 8-base is just highlighting that, hey, these are the patterns that we know 80% or 90% of web application or mobile application projects need. Just use it and, you know, move your project along farther. Spend your money on, you know, on better marketing. Spend your money on, you know, hiring people that are going to help with your sales, or, you know, your user interface development or whatnot. The things that really your customers will recognize as the value of your company. There's no need to go and kind of reinvent the wheel in that way. You know, when it comes to where's your infrastructure.
Just thinking, like, could you imagine a low code developer just like building out like an 8-base infrastructure and then serving up like a really slick app and like a web app, and just saying they've done it all themselves, and someone looked at it and was like, this is actually a pretty legit setup without having to like compromise on those immediate pushbacks that you get. So like, oh, you use this, like, oh, it's only like an MVP or a prototype.
Exactly.
So, yeah. I think it's great. So thanks again for your time. That was awesome. I know it's going to be really useful for a lot of people, because we see every day new people kind of starting to graduate out of the no code space and saying like, what else is possible? Like, how do I upgrade these apps? I've had clients that are worried about things like authentication or security or databases or scalability. So I think something like 8-base puts a lot of those immediate challenges to rest, which is cool.
For sure. No, it was a pleasure, Tom. So thank you for your time.
Thanks again. See you again. See you later. Thanks, everyone. Bye.